Hello, good morning, and welcome to our third Lent reflection on this Saturday morning. We're considering over the Saturday mornings of Lent, and the last two Saturdays we have been considering, and the videos are available on our website, how we are brothers and sisters of Pontius Pilate. And we've been looking at what we know about Pontius Pilate and where he came from, and what we know of him, and how his experience of life reflects ours, and how he's perhaps just not a cut-out villain of the Christian story as we know it. I've been using this book as a source material, and some of you have bought it, I know, and are reading it. Pilate, the biography of an invented man, by Anne Rowe. This was given to me by Arthur Kay, actually, in 2017. Thank you, Arthur. Which I read then, and I've been considering since, and this Lent I've returned to it to give it some further thought. Everything I have to say doesn't come from this book, but it really is a super book, putting together Roman history and sources such as apocryphal gospels, which mention Pontius Pilate, and indeed mystery plays and works of fiction to piece together what Pilate was like. I just want to read a little bit to you. Last week we were considering where Pilate came from, where he was born, perhaps in Germany, perhaps in Spain, perhaps in Italy, and his story until the time that he was called by Herod to be procurator or governor of Judea in Jerusalem. And I just want to read a couple of passages from the period, the chapter when Anne Rowe starts considering what happened once Pilate got to Judea, to Jerusalem. Pilate arrived there, arriving in the port of Caesarea in about the year 26, which of course they didn't call 26 then, but as we would call it in the year 26, probably about 6 or 7 years before he encountered Jesus of Nazareth. We assume this date because his predecessor, according to Josephus, that's the Roman historian, was appointed immediately after the death of Augustus in the year 14 and served for 11 years. And because when Pilate was recalled in the year 36, Josephus remarks that he'd been in Judea for a decade. Some think he arrived in the year 19, which would have made him more experienced when he encountered Christ, but Josephus's calculations seem good enough. Now, Pilate in Rome could often have observed the Jewish rhythms of life, the robes and the beards, the hush on Friday evening, the hum of Saturday prayers during Shabbat. But he would probably not have cared to study them much. Romans nursed some lively prejudices against Jews, based largely on misunderstanding what they believed. Sabbath observance persuaded them that the Jews were bone idle. Petronius Arbiter, unless he was being extraordinarily offensive, thought they worshipped a pig god. And Horace, in his satires, painted Jews as proselytizers, always on the lookout for drifting Romans to draw into their prayer groups, and deeply superstitious, believing, for example, that frankincense would combust spontaneously if placed on a holy stone. Now, when he got to Judea, to do his job well, in Pilate's view, was not a matter of understanding the Jews or the land he ruled over. He just had to use to the profit of Rome the powers that he'd been given. His job was not a plum appointment, it was a junior officer's billet. More experienced men got Syria or Egypt. It was also a challenge because Judea was such a new and recalcitrant province. Although it had a mixed population of Jews, Greeks, Samaritans, Syrians and Idumeans, all other ethnic conflicts paled beside the overwhelming cultural clash between the Romans and the Jews. Now, the Jewish nation considered itself in every way superior to Rome, especially chosen by God and essentially untouchable. That's the temple authorities as we would know them. Any Roman would have been disquieted by that. All his schooling, his experience, the lines of Livy and Virgil ringing in his head, told him that it was his own nation the gods had blessed and appointed. The Romans, the lords of creation, the togaed people, Cicero put it with typical bluntness. There is no race which has not either been so utterly destroyed that it hardly exists, or so thoroughly subdued that it remains submissive, or so pacified that it rejoices in our victory and rule. Earlier in the same speech, he dismissed the Jews explicitly as people born to be slaves. It was a constant headache to Pilate that they were of the opposite opinion. Now, the point of the Roman presence in Judea was to secure tax revenues, keep the peace, and establish trade with Rome. It was not to colonize or Romanize it at all. Most Romans knew a lost cause when they saw one. Nor was their job to act like an occupying army. Pilate's troops were more of a police force, a bit like the Hong Kong police in the old days. They were more of a police force responsible for guarding important buildings, protecting the governor, controlling sheep in the streets, and, when necessary, punishing malefactors. They also carried out the duties of interrogators and secret police. In 1997, part of Pilate's palace at Caesarea was excavated, revealing a room, later than Pilate's time actually, but built over another of similar function, with a black and white mosaic floor. The mosaic carried the legend, "I have come to this room in the good hope that I shall be secure." Israeli archaeologists assumed it was an inner interrogation room in which spies were debriefed or prisoners tortured to elicit secret information. And Pilate routinely used his troops to carry out crucifixions, the favoured punishment for thieves, bandits, and all low-class troublemakers. These were performed in peacetime after a cursory hearing, and at times of rebellion immediately and en masse. After the uprising under Spartacus, do you remember that movie with Kirk Douglas? After the uprising under Spartacus a century before, the Appian Way in Rome was lined with crucified slaves on both sides. In Judea, after one uprising, Gratus crucified 200 Jews at once. Under Pilate, there was no record of mass crucifixions, but we can assume a steady flow of them. The governor would have seen this as good administration, the policy that would later enable Tacitus to sum up his tour in Judea as sub Tiberio quies, under Tiberius, peace. Crucifixion was not done without a reason, and the reasons were advertised on the crosses themselves. The horror of this punishment for non-Romans was its savagery, and for Romans its disgrace, but not randomness. Rabble-rousing Jews could anticipate the cross as a matter of course. As the good thief in Luke remarked, hanging beside Jesus where Pilate had put him, We were sentenced justly. We are paying for what we did. I just really wanted to read those extracts to underline the kind of banality of life as a tin pot little procurator or governor in Judea at the time. That Pilate wasn't a great man. It was a posting that he was looking after for the quiet life. He's incidentally just looking over my left shoulder there. Can you see? There he is. I've got a little bust of Pilate behind me. In fact, I'll move this way so that you can see. You can see Pilate looking on. Now, I like much of what we hear about Pilate's workaday existence in Jerusalem, because it reminds us how both the Jews in Jerusalem and the Romans, if you like, thought that they were the chosen people. They both considered themselves innately superior to the other. Now, is that like us at all? Do we consider ourselves superior to other people? Well, surely not. But an examination of our history shows that clearly we have done. Much of the focus of recent months and over the past year has been on our role as a nation in the history of slavery. Clearly, in the 17th to 19th centuries, the slave trade was based on the idea that one race of people was innately superior to another. And there was a kind of Untermenschen, a kind of lower breed of human being that was savage, that didn't deserve the respect that we would afford to fellows of our species. So before we become too smug and think, no, we don't consider ourselves superior, it's only fairly recently in our history that we have exhibited a bestial superiority to our fellow human beings. And I wonder more recently whether the way in which we treat immigrants, for instance, reveals a sense, perhaps a subconscious sense of superiority. They are not like us. We are a superior people to them. The poor and the homeless. I wonder if we can sometimes consider ourselves better than them, not just better off than them. These people are not us. They are the other. They are something else. They are below us. There's something more cheap about their lives. It's an uncomfortable thought, isn't it? And we only, if you like, need to remind ourselves of the British rule in India. By no means am I suggesting that colonial policy was all bad or was of itself an evil. But nevertheless, it is worth reminding ourselves that our rule in India was not unlike, in many respects, Roman rule in Judea. There was a local population with which we needed to cooperate, to support, to give a version of controlled, governed freedom to ensure its own prosperity. And it did have some very, very bleak aspects of course, as well. We've just been considering Pilate's use of military force when it was necessary to quell uprising, to quell insurgency. Well, in British rule in India, there were abominations, atrocities, such as the massacre of more than 400 civilians at the temple at Amritsar. That's a blot and a dark scar on British history. And let's just remember that Gandhi, the great leader of Indian independence and ultimately of self-determination and separation from the British Empire, which was itself a very, very bloody escapade. Let's remember that Gandhi was tried and convicted of sedition, which was the same charge and conviction that Pilate inflicted on Jesus of Nazareth. So let's be careful about considering our superiority, our innate greater value than other people that we might encounter in the world. Because the way in which great empires such as the Roman Empire, but also in the past the British Empire, the French, the Spanish empires, look at how Central America was treated by the Spanish. In many respects, how, if we can call it such, the American empire, not of course led by a monarchy and therefore empire doesn't apply, but when we consider the intervention of the United States in foreign affairs under some circumstances, and the institution of penal colonies such as Guantanamo Bay. Very often, our modern superpowers in recent history have behaved not unlike the Roman Empire. So it's worth dwelling on that, I think, sometimes, because in that way we dwell not on looking at those ghastly Romans and the way they treated the Jews and the dreadful fate that they held in store for those who rebelled or rose up against them, crucifixion. The fate that our Saviour suffered under the Roman Empire. Let's not think in terms of that being something that a ghastly different, long gone power instituted, but something that's really all too typical of big powers in the world, big colonial powers like the Roman Empire. Because when we do consider that, we might understand, indeed recognize Pontius Pilate in the world around us. And indeed, once again, recognize that in that sense, we are all Pontius Pilate's brothers and sisters. So, that's all I want to say this morning. And I'll look forward to seeing some of you at church tomorrow. We're at St. Bartholomew's, aren't we, tomorrow? No, we're not. We're at All Saints. It's on there. It's on the website. No, we're not. It's second Sunday, isn't it? So we are at St. Bart's. I should have it in front of me, St. Bart's, and I hope to see some of you there tomorrow for our parish communion at 10, or indeed at 8 o'clock. The 10 o'clock will be live streamed. Look forward to catching up with you then, and I hope that if you're unable to come to church, you might join our communion online. Meanwhile, I'll return for another reflection on Pontius Pilate next Saturday, and I hope you can join us then. Meanwhile, go well, keep safe, and God bless you all.